Hello and welcome to the EIC Clearly podcast. EIC Clearly? See what I did there? This is the podcast that brings you in-depth discussions with energy, policy and thought leaders on the most critical issues, trends and innovations shaping the global energy supply chain. Well, here we are again, another EIC Clearly podcast. And I'm here with Honorary President of EIC, Campbell. Keir, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Last time, just 2 months ago, we were talking in our first EIC Clearly podcast, which was Trump 2.0. Is that totally out of date or still relevant, what we talked about? Things move quickly, right?
Yeah, I think most people, including me, didn't expect President Trump to act so quickly and so dramatically. So I think we've all been caught a bit on the hop. Even the professionals didn't predict this. And so he's sort of come out of the blocks moving very quickly, signing all these executive orders. So I think the situation has changed significantly. So if we go back and listen to the previous conversation,
which we were talking about, if you're a business leader, how do you adapt to the world of Trump? And just to clarify again, we're not here to make any political views about one or another. We're just here to talk about, if you're a business leader, how do you respond and adapt and make good decisions in this environment? And back then, I think we were trying to say, like in the US market, still feels like a positive market to invest in, be cautious, but still go. Do you think that's still the case? Or, 2 months on, do you think it's even more caution required?
I think caution's required. I think there's clearly intense volatility in the trade area. Financial markets are very volatile and US policy seems to change from day to day. And it's affecting both the US and having implications around the world. I was listening to BBC Breakfast the other day, and I think they were in Phoenix, Arizona, and they were interviewing the owner of a toy shop, and she's about to publish her latest catalogue, and she said, I can't put prices in. I don't know what the prices are going to be. So it's right down to the nitty-gritty level, small business, to the really big businesses. So I think only Trump himself knows where he's going to end up. Perhaps maybe he doesn't even know. Maybe he's just throwing out curveballs to see if a favourable trade deal can be made. So I don't think we can speculate on where we might land on tariffs. But I think there's hints he's beginning to tone things down a little bit. I'm certainly not a banker, but I assume that the markets will stabilize when the tariffs and or trade deals are finalized, maybe in the weeks and months ahead. But yeah, I can't predict, and neither, I think, can the experts at the moment. Only President Trump and his team knows what's going to happen in the next few weeks.
And it feels like this has all been about, let's call it economic warfare with China. Do you agree with that? And what is happening from a China point of view? Businesses that either have customers in China or supply chain in China, how should they respond to this?
I don't think we can ignore China. It's a population of 1.5 billion or thereabouts, and has a manufacturing sector that dwarfs many of the sectors in US and Europe. And key, it has an ability to adapt at pace and scale. The idea that China produces cheap goods that they kind of dump around the world market of a lower quality, that is rapidly fading. I think the R&D growth in China is significant, and you can see that they are innovating in a way that perhaps Europe and US businesses still do. So while the US is a significant part of China exports, the current situation, if it sustains, means that there'll be huge inventories waiting to be dispatched, but to where, and supply chains that will be looking for new markets in Europe and Asia and maybe elsewhere. So if the trade war with China doesn't resolve, we could see a lot of competition from China in markets they haven't previously looked at, that are markets both overseas and in the UK. So I think there could be significant new competition for UK and European businesses if the trade war isn't resolved. And let's hope it does, because it's not really in our interest to have a big trade war with China. We need that supply chain. Many industries rely on the supply chain with China, and switching from one supply chain to a completely different supply chain is going to take years, isn't it? Don't you think?
Well, arguably the Trump policies are assuming it takes weeks and months, because a lot of, I think, what he's hoping is that manufacturing switches into the US more quickly because of the pain of tariffs. You talked about dumping. So, Chinese technology and products now having to be dumped outside US markets. Of course, there are other markets that are subject to that, such as Germany in the trade sense. Do you see kind of European competitiveness, which was already struggling, I think, before this, suffering quickly now and, being seen very much as the lame duck of the sort of global trade? Or do you think there is a recovery going to come in Europe that's all about finding new partners, getting closer together, being smarter in the way we trade as one block, even though we're not part of that block at the moment?
I think US is 20% of China's export market, something like that. If the trade war with China isn't resolved, then those businesses will want to go somewhere. So they will surely want to target Europe. They'll surely want to target Africa and South America and the rest of Asia. So I think it's going to bring fresh competition to an already struggling market. There could be upsides, of course. It could result in lower prices, which would be good for consumers. It won't necessarily be good for businesses.
Lower prices because of more competition.
Yes.
It's not going to be about higher margins because of higher volumes. It's going to be about lower margins just to protect volumes.
Yes. I can't see a way through it at the moment. If they can't resolve this, these supply chains in China are going to aggressively pursue other markets. I think the president of China has been on a bit of a trade mission at the moment around Asia, hasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, maybe he'll be popping up here sometime soon. Who knows what's going to happen? Strange times, Stuart.
Maybe he'll be the next EIC Clearly interviewee. We'll see about that, shall we?
Yeah, it's out.
Now, while we're talking then about trade, of course, that links inherently to finance.
Yeah.
Do you think finance, whether we're talking about, green finance or finance generally, is now even more protected in terms of companies saying, I might be wanting to invest in sectors that are much more stable now and energy doesn't play that game? Or actually, are they saying, we're just not going to invest, we're going to wait for everything to settle down? Or is this the time for investors to make hay? Because let's face it, if you're in the stock markets, this kind of craziness is where you make the most money.
Yeah, you and I are not financiers. But, I've talked to my finance friends, and they say the last thing that investors want is volatility. If they're going to invest in a new business or invest in a new technology, they want certainty. They want to be able to predict.
You're talking here about large, mega complex, multi-decade infrastructure projects is what you're talking about in terms of needing the stability, right?
Well, yeah, even small businesses that, SMEs that want to grow, especially into the energy transition space. These investors, whether they're angel investors or big corporate investors, they'll have to go to their shareholders and give a prediction of cash flows and returns, etc. And that just seems to be very difficult at the moment. And we all know that the energy transition needs trillions of dollars from the private sector. It's not going to come from government. So, my finance colleagues say they're going to hold back until there's more certainty. But I think people are being cautious. And you can see even big companies are holding back decisions at the moment to see how things go. But I still think that we can come to the energy transition, Stuart. But that's still going to go ahead in some shape or form. It kind of has to, but we'll come to that later.
Just had 2 Survive and Thrive interviews, both linked to industries that are booming because of data centers. So that's an example of, I think, it doesn't matter what the instability is in the market. There are some sectors which are linked to energy, but only more indirectly, that are absolutely booming.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is I listened to a newscast which went back to the financial crash led by Lehman Brothers. And at that time, you could only communicate by phone. Now it all happens on social media, it happens by WhatsApp, etc. The pace of change, the ups and downs, the speculation can happen much faster than it did before. And I think that's leading to, indeed, yet more turmoil in the markets. But I think you're right. There's projects that have to go ahead and will some way or another find a way through, perhaps with more support from governments. And of course, that's difficult because governments don't really have much more money, do they? They're struggling as is, whether it's UK or even other European governments.
Maybe just closing out on the US and the sort of Trump part of it before we move into other areas, though. The data centers, I think, is important because companies in the energy supply chain that are looking to know where to invest right now, this must feel like a lucrative opportunity to diversify. And what's really interesting, I think, is there's an assumption from the green thought leaders, which is data centers will be powered through renewables or through nuclear. That's not what's happening. They're being powered through gas. Who knew? But at least in the US, which is where most of this boom is happening right now, it's a gas boom, actually, not just a data center. Let's move on now from our friends in the US. I look forward to seeing you at OTC very soon. Let's now go back to the UK. So what's the speculation around energy policy, energy stability, or just policy stability generally in the UK right now?
Well, the key message from the Minister of Energy today was we want to hear from business. We're open to talk to business. So come and talk to us. And he said he really did appreciate the conversation he had with EIC, Neil and Rebecca, because in a private one-to-one, they were able to give him some hard data, which is a great advantage of EIC. It's not that we talk with opinions. Yes, Survive and Thrive is great, and we get genuine opinions and put them together in a nice way. But the database that EIC holds is hard business data, and that's something that ministers don't often see. But his key message was, we do want to hear from business. We don't want to just keep hearing from the PR gurus of big corporates who've got the clout to do that kind of thing. We want to hear from real business leaders. He also said, if you think the energy transition's just starting, well, it already has started. It's well on its way. And the government's still serious about the energy transition. It wants it to happen. It knows it must happen. So it's got its policies in place to make it happen. But just on a personal note, I thought to myself, the Labour government came in, high ambitions to do this and do that, and they're kind of being blown off course, not just Trump, but by all the other stuff that's going on around the world. It makes me wonder whether they wish they hadn't won the election.
It reminds me of when Boris coming into power, and he had a wonderful, successful first year, some would say, and then COVID came along and knocked him completely off course, didn't it? And he never recovered from that.
Yeah, and today they were mentioning that he set some of the targets for hydrogen, and he was saying he wants 10 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030, which doesn't even look like it's achievable. So
governments now face, of course, as you say, with multiple priorities and shortage of money. And I mean, defence is just an example of that, isn't it? When you're working in Department for International Trade, you've obviously seen ministers at work and how they deal with these kind of changing, conflicting priorities and lack of cash to be able to fund all the things they want to do. What do you imagine is going on inside, Westminster and Whitehall?
I have an idea, because I talked to one or two of my ex-colleagues, and I think when I was there, it was always trimming. So you'd be told, cut 2% off this year's budget or cut 3% off. This time it's more serious. It's more of a bottom-up exercise, and in my 4 years, I haven't seen that. I don't think...
Not pulling out the roots, though.
In business, you may every year do a quick trim, but every 2 or 3 years...
Do you think this is inspired by Doge?
I think it happened before Doge. They're having to do proper bottom-up estimates, and I think we'll see things emerge, or the government will see things emerge that may surprise them.
But how do you continue to reform NHS and rebuild our military defence capability without money?
Well, I think you just have to set priorities.
Where does net zero sit in priorities?
It's a good question. Certain departments are protected. Health is protected. Defence is protected. But other departments don't have that privilege of being a protected department. So we're going to have to squeeze other sectors, but as we said before, a lot of the money for the energy transition has to come from the private sector. So I think it's about mobilizing the whole of the industry. One of the key things I picked up, Stuart, from the session today, we went through a lot: carbon capture storage, floating offshore wind, hydrogen, we did decommissioning and stuff. If you look at the next period, say now to 2035, there's a lot going to have to happen in the UK. And you just wonder whether we have the capacity in skills, whether it's finance, to do all of that at the same time. Build carbon capture and floating offshore wind, to build nuclear power stations. I mean, whether we have the institutional capacity to do that in the UK without bringing in foreign labour or whatever. I think that was a genuine concern, that the supply chain is really struggling to deliver. They are delivering. There is progress on carbon capture and storage. There is progress on hydrogen, floating offshore wind. There is progress. But if you want to go at scale and pace, it's challenging to see how it can all happen. And you must see that.
I do, but I always come with a completely opposite view because I sit in lots of events where there are people that are not actually running a supply chain business who say, though, I assume the supply chain is what's going to stop us. My view is it's absolutely not that. They all respond to the opportunity. The problem is there's not enough opportunities. So it becomes a kind of a theoretical...
I might have agreed with you before I went into that conference, but I've come out of the 2 days thinking there are plenty of opportunities, whether you look at the pipeline for offshore wind or floating offshore wind or carbon capture and storage.
But they haven't reached FID.
No, but they've made significant progress. So I think I would agree with you before yesterday and today, but I think now I've come away a lot more optimistic about the number of opportunities that are there. But I'm more cautious now about our collective UK Inc. ability to deliver it all.
I say bring it on. Give them the problem. Let the supply chain break because they are too busy. They haven't had that for as long as I've been in the industry.
They did say that as well. Yeah. So there were people who said, "Oh, bring it on. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens."
Right. So let's talk now about the North Sea Decarbonisation Conference that you've been kindly chairing for us for the last 2 days. And we had Michael Shanks, the Energy Minister, on for that. So what's your summary of that, what you heard? You've already talked a bit about it today, but kind of how would you summarise it?
Yeah, this is the 5th one, right, Stuart? And I think I've been to 4. And each one has shown progress. And I think this one has shown more progress than I had expected. Some things are slower, like floating offshore wind is deploying more slowly.
It's not deploying.
Yeah, well, not deploying just yet. But you can see that things like, just to pick an odd one, tidal stream, they really are starting to deploy in small scale some of the technologies that are there. And you can see that carbon capture is progressing, but some things are not. Hydrogen is clearly not progressing. We won't achieve the 10 gigawatts by 2030 if that's the right level. We won't achieve the sustainable aviation fuel target, 10% by 2040 or something. The progress is being made, but we're not making progress at a rate that will allow us to achieve what's the official government targets.
I was, again, interviews with Survive and Thrive. One of them was a company that is supplying hydrogen-ready equipment into Germany. This is hydrogen equipment that used to be gas equipment that's now converted to hydrogen. And Germany buying many of these pieces of equipment, but no hydrogen supply, because hydrogen supply is not economic. So this is the issue, right? I'm quite worried about hydrogen. It's a kind of collapsing economic case, still unregulated. So anyway, perhaps we shouldn't get into that whole area of potential debate.
But what I also thought was interesting, is probably overlooked, is decommissioning. And what people are saying is we've got, a lot of platforms and facilities that need to be decommission in the North Sea. And of course, we've got experience of this. And we are sadly doing work in Norway, Australia for decommissioning. And yet it's not happening in the same way in the UK. And it seems to be mixed reasons. In some cases say, well, we may want to use that platform, or we may want to use that pipeline for injection of cut CO2 or whatever. But I've often thought, and I know you think this as well, that decommissioning is a big golden opportunity for UK industry. And Malaysia is apparently using UK businesses, so that I think was quite nice to be highlighted.
And the supply chain, of course, loves exporting, so they're quite happy to do that business around them. Yeah, it was the North Sea Transition Authority, wasn't it, that was making the point, which is there's a lot of decommissioning that will need to be done in the UK, but they can't get the ducks lined up yet for the supply chain to get started. The money's not available, or the vessel's not available, or the infrastructure might be used for possible net zero projects. You're right. I thought it was interesting that the pitch was, can we do UK first, please? And I'm like, I don't care, as long as the supply chains do work around the world.
I'm going to disagree. I think it's much easier, because from my DIT times, it's much easier to sell things overseas if you've done them in the UK.
Yep.
But we have done.
Maybe it's now we have to sell things overseas and then prove to the UK we can do it.
Maybe that would be sad, wouldn't it? Yeah. I think that was a slightly sad thing.
So yes, but you're right. I thought it was very interesting, the discussion around the sort of the tidal and wave technology. I was struck from that, though, that they were comparing the sort of levelized cost of energy to things like offshore wind and solar or nuclear, which didn't seem like-for-like comparisons. So I feel like they're still early on in developing even the business case. And I know the supply chain is very interested in supporting that. SAF continues to be, as you say, it's a technology which there's more demand than supply. And I think now there are a lot of also marine areas where there's more demand than supply for green fuels for marine technology. But it's not just the supply of fuel that's not there, but then the port infrastructure, the standardized charging infrastructure.
That was brought up. It was a good point that indeed I asked it whether the SAF technology could be used for marine. They said no, it's a different type of fuel, so don't confuse them. But there was quite a strong theme that you could do a lot of good work with offshore wind and whatever floating marine stuff. But there was a lot of stuff in the ports that you had to do, the port infrastructure, all the support vessels. And there was an initiative to progress clean support vessels for the offshore industry. And that's something I hadn't really thought about myself. You can bring your clean boats, you can take your floating offshore wind farm out from a dock, but if the port is not green, you've only done half the job, really. So
the thing that strikes me, though, so the automotive industry is mandating, regulating, and penalizing those companies that don't transition from combustion engine to EVs in all sorts of ways. The aviation industry is doing the same and forcing SAF on the industry. The industry is not able to keep up with these regulations in both automotive and aviation. And now the marine industry globally is also regulating and mandating. Why isn't the sort of primary power and land-based fuel sector doing the same? Why is it automotive, well, basically the transport sectors, they're moving faster than the generation sector? There's no regulation that forces it yet. Why is that?
I think some of the targets that have been set, and I don't think the government would accept this yet, but some of the targets that were set some time ago are probably not achievable. I suspect that when they set the SAF targets, it wasn't done with a rigorous review of the supply chain capabilities and the necessary...
Well, we're here. They just need to ask us. We've got the data.
Well, yeah, you need all this approved. So the processes have to be approved, ASTME approvals and all that. It has to be certified.
My question is, though, it seems to me that the marine, the aviation, and the automotive industries all have regulated targets to transition towards, reduction in hydrocarbon fuel, right? And these are all regulated, and there's penalties in place if you don't do it. But in the power generation sector, and in the hydrogen sector, and in the carbon capture sector, there are no regulations yet. There's no penalty for failing to do it to anybody yet.
I don't necessarily agree with the penalties on the automotive industry. I don't think that's the right way to go around motivating people to switch to green fuels. I think there's better ways of doing it. I don't know what they might be, but I don't think you should try and force people to do it. That just causes resentment and, it gets you into difficulties.
And that is what's happening in the transport sector, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the road they're taking.
Yes.
So let's try and wrap up then.
I'd come away positive. Yeah, the challenge is, and I tend to agree with you a little bit, that the supply chain just has to try and get on with it. But in Spain, Australia, Norway, other countries, Malaysia, or Saudi Arabia, regulations just fall away. Approvals are given speedily. So, I think companies will go where they can get approvals as fast as possible, perhaps. And then maybe there is a need for more exchange between governments of how they do things. People were appreciative of the barriers that were put in place, health and safety, the environment and stuff like that we have in the UK. But I think there was a sentiment that we were over-prescribed in terms of what and how we can do it. But no, I came away positive, so not to do. But there are signs we're getting there. Maybe early shoots. Maybe you disagree, Stuart. I think the shoots are beginning to look green.
Unfortunately, Survive and Thrive for the last 8 years has showed companies don't like to go to new export markets. So domestic opportunity should be what it's all about. But let's hope that as the dust settles or as new dust appears in geopolitics and energy policy, the business leaders continue to innovate, be entrepreneurial, to be resilient, because that's what's needed. And I think actually energy supply chain leaders, that's what they're brilliant at. They've had to be. Brexit, COVID, financial crisis, policy change, it's happening all the time. I think companies now are so used to it, they ruthlessly move to find the new opportunity. And I think that's part of the problem for policymakers is there ain't a single business leader out there that's going to wait for a policymaker now. Thanks for listening. We would love to hear your thoughts. Share your comments on this episode and let us know what topics you'd like EIC to explore next. And for more insights like this, follow EIC on LinkedIn using the link in the description below. See you next time.